Assalamu alaikum, I'm Halima Shafiq. Welcome to the Academy of Champions Module 2 with Dr. Adil Anwar. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, Halima.
Talking about the significance of time, how would you relate its importance with daily life and past experiences?
So, Halima, the thing is, time is one of those phenomena that once it goes, it doesn't come back. So, unlike your health, which can go and it can come back, unlike your wealth, which can go and it can come back, time is one of those phenomena that it goes and it continues, it carries on to go and it doesn't come back. So that's how important and significant time is. The other thing is, it's your habits and routines that define who you are at the end of the day, ultimately. So having strong habits and routines from my past experience shows how productive one can be.
What advice would you give to the younger generation and how they should complete their responsibilities in a given amount of time?
So with the young generation, the key challenges that we face is distractions. We have so many distractions. We pick up our phone, we've got one alert coming from WhatsApp, one from Snapchat, one from Instagram. So there's so many distractions. So the key thing that I've realized is, one is to batch process things. Batch process things by monotask, do one thing at a time. And the other thing is that switch your phones onto silent. Because when our phones aren't on silent, there's something known as cognitive load. So every time that your phone vibrates or makes a little noise, your mind starts to calculate, it's working out who could it be, what do they want from me, what do I have to do for them. So all these questions create a cognitive load, and it's really leading to a lot of mental health illnesses. So putting your phone on silence is another tip that's I would like to share.
Considering your episode of Reality of Life, how can one manage time, energy and money?
So the purpose of the Reality of Life diagram was to show that basically when you're young, you have a lot of time, you have a lot of energy, but you don't have the money. And the second thing is, when you become adults, then you have the money, you have the energy, but you don't have the time. And then once you have all the money that you need, you have the time, all the time that you need, you don't have the energy when you're elderly. So the thing is, because you know the reality of life, you can lead it to some sort of balance in life. So you can start asking yourself, how much is it that you really need to survive? Do you just keep chasing blindly, following blindly how much money you need, or do you set yourself some goals and targets? And the other thing is, what I realized from that diagram was that basically those that give their time when they're young are the same people that will give money when they have the money as adults. Those that don't give their time and volunteer when they're young are the same people that won't give the money when they have it, when they're adults. So the interesting thing I use whilst I conduct interviews, that I ask for what the previous voluntary work is, what time have they given when they have the time, because if they didn't give the time when they have the time, they won't give the money when they have the money. So that's what the reality of life, the purpose of sharing the reality of life was.
What is the key to get your priorities right, or how can we know that at this particular time this would be the best decision for us?
So when it comes to getting your priorities right, there are two tools that I wanted to share. One is triaging. So in triaging, basically you ask yourself three things. If I help this person, will he survive? If he'll survive, then you leave him regardless if he survives, whether you help him or not. If someone's going to die regardless of whether you're going to help them or not, then you leave that as well. If there's someone that you can help and they will survive, then you help them. So triaging is a concept that they would use in the battlefields during the wartime. And the other tool that I would like to share is a tool in Stephen Covey's book 7 Habits of Effective People, which is basically urgency versus importance. So if something's urgent and important, you do that first. Then if something is not urgent but important, you do that next. And then if something is urgent but not important, you do that thirdly. And then lastly, you do something that's not urgent and not important.
They say that females can multitask unlike men. So do you agree or not?
That's a very interesting question. So this notion of whether females can multitask or not, it originates from the fact that traditionally females in the kitchen, they would have one child in the other hand, be cooking with the other hand, so they're multitasking. Now when it comes to this day and age, that actually is very interesting, because it's no longer the case where the females can multitask and men are built to monotask, because the thing is, it has to do with the task itself. Now the tasks that we're doing in this day and age are much more cerebral, using mental energy. Now that is very taxing, and because the energy is very taxing, it's energy consuming tasks that you're doing, regardless of the genders, what we're finding is that monotasking is the way to go forward. And in this notion of females can multitask and men can't multitask is actually no longer the case.
So, do you believe that a perfectionist lie is basically a lazy person who cannot complete their task due to procrastination?
So the perfectionist lie is someone who basically is prolonging things, saying that I'll perfect it one day and then I'll launch it and release it. But the thing is, most of the things that have been done have usually been launched and then they've been iterated, they've been worked upon. So basically a software, when it's released, you'll get the beta 1, beta 2 version. Any other, for example, cars that you get models and they evolve with each year. It's not like they wait for the perfect car model and then they release it. So it can be thought of as procrastination, so that I'll do it, and you never end up getting around to do it. But what the main takeaway from the perfectionist lie was that to get work released, even books, for example, in books you have edition 1, edition 2, so everything improves with time. So that was the main takeaway from the perfectionist lie.
What do you mean by human average attention span is less than that of goldfish?
Okay, so a goldfish's ability to focus is very low. So a goldfish gets easily distracted. Any little thing and is distracted. So now what they found is that the attention span of humans has gone below a goldfish. So we are instantly distracted, and that's thanks to our technology and phones. So whenever we get an alert, a message, like I said, even if your phone's on vibration, so I keep my phone on silent. So by keeping your phone silent, the good thing is that you are in charge of your phone isn't in charge of you. So whenever I get time, I look at my phone and look at what's come through. Whereas if you have it on vibration or if you have it on alert, then basically every tone that it makes, your mind is trying to work out what is your phone asking from you.
So how would you compare the life of West with the life of East with respect to Iqbal's observation?
So Iqbal said something profound. He said that basically, शरीयत के पैमाने जो हमने तोड़े मगरिब ने जाके जोड़े. So all the scales and balances that we destroyed of the Sharia were basically taken up by the West, and you see more Islam in the West being practiced, even though it's practiced unconsciously. But you see it more practiced in the West than we sadly see it in the Muslim countries and in the East. So and it is profound because he realized that during his time that we broke the Sharia's, the scales of Sharia, and we just took Deen as a superficial thing, and we didn't get into the core and the essence of Deen. So for example, when we read the Quran, we just read it and we don't read it with the meaning. So we have so many Hufaz, mashallah, now, but the thing is, when we ask them what's written in the book, they start scratching their heads. They don't know what's written in the book. They know the book, they know the book off by heart, but they don't know what's inside it. What's the book instructing them to do? So an example is that if you buy a car and you have an instruction manual, you keep reading the manual in Japanese, but you don't know what it says. So how are you going to drive the car? So that's the example that comes to mind. But unless if you don't know how to drive the car, that is, and use its features. So the other thing that I realized when I was in the West was that when I was going to all the top conferences, the conclusions that the academics were coming to were basically bang on the Sunnah and the Quran. We've abandoned the Quran and Sunnah and they've taken it up. And all the conclusions that they were coming up with is what was already in our deen, but we've abandoned our deen. So this was the standing thing for me, because in a conference of 300 people, there were only about 5 Muslims there. So there's small presence, and even after 5 Muslims, how many of them were practicing and they knew the deen? Then they were able to compare, which was very few. So this was the sad thing that I realized when I was in the West.
What do you mean by you have to manage your energy and not time?
Okay, so this is an interesting concept that I learned from the Energy Project, which is headed by Tony Schwartz. So when they do this quadrant where they had performance versus emotion, high performance, low performance, positive emotion, negative emotion, what they realized was that basically depending upon where you revolve, which set of the quadrant you are, that affects you as a person. And so it's about the quality of time rather than the quantity of time that you spend. So if you work continuously, that doesn't mean, so for example, someone works 4 hours and another person works 8 hours. If they're performing at 50% for 8 hours, it's the same as working for 100% for 4 hours. So if you're able to renew your energy and you can bring much more to the given hour, then the thing is, you'd rather do that, you'd rather work less and more effectively than rather than working more and ineffectively. So the idea is to work less but be present in the work that you're doing in the hour that you're working in. So that's the concept between energy and not your time.
Talking about the energy quadrant, can we stay in the performance state and the renewal state forever?
The idea is that you stay in those two states. So be positive, have positive emotions, inculcate positive emotions, and then just increase your energy when needed and then lower your energy when needed. So basically you go from a state of performance to a state of renewal. So the idea is, yes. So whilst I was doing my PhD, I actually managed to achieve that. So either I was performing or I was renewing. Those were the only two states that I was in.
How do you become an action taker?
So becoming an action taker is like forming a habit. The more things that you do, and the key to becoming an action taker is actually creating checklists from my experience. So create checklists, so each day have like 3 tasks or 4 tasks and keep on performing them. When you keep on performing them, you'll create momentum, and with the momentum you'll be an action taker. So that's the general formula.
So what makes you think that history and time are repeating or rhyming?
So thanks to the work of Martin Armstrong and Larry Ellison, who've studied waves and history repeating itself. So they've done cycle analysis, what's called cycle analysis. So what they found is history tends to repeat itself by the number pi. So pi 3.14, etc, etc, etc. So what they found is that when they mapped on events that happened throughout history, they were repeating themselves, similar events were repeating themselves by the number pi. And so this is what not makes me think, but there's evidence for that history seems to repeat itself or rhyme. And they use this, so the other concepts is K-wave and Elliott wave. These are principles that are there that they use to forecast economics. And not only that, the markets, to predict what's going to happen in the markets, they use K-wave and Elliott's wave principle. So there's actual evidence of history repeating itself and rhyming. So this is where that comes from.
Can you give an example where you might have felt that history has repeated?
So I'll give you 2 examples actually. So one is Martin Armstrong himself. So there's a documentary called The Forecaster that has been made on his life journey. So basically he's someone that forecasted that something was going to happen in 9/11. So he said that something's going to happen in 9/11 and the markets are going to crash. So how did he know that? It's because through his work on cycles, history is repeating itself. So he knew that something was going to happen on 9/11. But what happened was they accused him that he had a following of something like 20,000 people on his email address. So he said that whenever he makes a forecast, people follow him, 20,000 people follow him, and that leads to an impact on the markets. But when he was in prison, what he had predicted was still happening. So even though he was in prison, what he predicted was still happening. And they realized that there was something in his model that he had created, that history is repeating itself by the number pi. So that's one thing. I'm also forecasting that this 21st century is a repeat of the 13th century. So I am making a forecast on that. Why am I making that? Is because in the 13th century, at the time of Maulana Rumi, it was a case where you had Mongols invading from one side, and you had basically the Byzantine land, and in the middle there were Muslims. So now we're watching this drama, Ertugrul. Ertugrul is very famous. So what they were doing, Mongols on one side, the Byzantine on the other side, okay, and the Muslims at the time were being oppressed. And what happened at that time was basically something that happened in Prophet Sallam's time, that basically you had Persians on one side, you had Romans on the other side, and then you had Islam. And basically the Romans were defeated and the Persians were defeated, and Islam came out on top. And even in the 13th century you had something similar. And in the 21st century, when you're seeing so much pressure put on Islam and so much temperatures rising, I feel that there'll be more personalities like Rumi that will form, and that'll come and revive this deen. So I'm very optimistic for the century.
So those are your predictions, basically.
Yes.
So at this point of your life, what advice would you give to the younger generation so that they do not make the mistakes that you have made in the past?
So there's two things whilst I've been in Pakistan. So I've been in Pakistan for almost 3 years now. So in December it'll be exactly 3 years. But what I've realized what's lacking in Pakistan are two things. One is mentorship and one is leadership. So when I was in the UK, what I realized was that there were all these mentorship schemes. So the beauty of mentorship schemes is that you get to interact with someone that's got much more experience than you, much more experience, exposure, much more knowledge and skills, and they're able to transfer that onto you at a young age. Now what I realized in Pakistan is that is what's lacking. We don't have that knowledge transfer from someone much more experienced to yourself. So that's what's lacking. Another thing that's lacking is leadership. Nowhere have I found in Pakistan that they're teaching leadership to children, or even teenagers, or even adults for that matter. No one's teaching leadership, and so this is something that I'm going to focus on with the Academy of Champions in the upcoming year, so 2021. I'm going to focus much more on leadership and promoting workshops and getting that skill sets transferred onto the younger generation. Other than that, what I've realized is that even my students at UET at the moment, I'm telling them to make mistakes. As students, you have such a beautiful opportunity, and it's such a blessing that you can make mistakes and there's hardly any repercussions. So repercussions because you're not married, you don't have any responsibilities, you don't have children crying, you don't have a spouse to worry about, so you don't have all these things to worry about. So it's a perfect environment to make mistakes and take risks. The other thing in Pakistan is that there's a lack of risk-taking culture. People don't take risks. And what I've realized in the West is that it's the opposite. In the West, the teenagers, the youth, they take risks. Here we don't take risks. We're very much risk averse. So taking risks and making mistakes, because the thing is, when you make mistakes at an early age, is that there's not that much consequence behind it. There's not that much impact. And you can learn from the mistakes and then you can grow. So the more mistakes you make, the more you learn, the more you grow. So that's the other thing I want to advise our youth, that take risks and then make mistakes, make loads of mistakes at a young age and learn from them, and then you'll grow. And that's what I actually preached to my PhD peers when I was at the University of Manchester. I actually told them as PhD students, make mistakes, make loads of mistakes, and you will grow. So that's my advice.
So this was Dr. Adil talking about his life experiences, and he told us that how we all can balance between our responsibilities and time.